2:47 a.m. The monitor screamed arrhythmia as the Navy SEAL convulsed. A synthetic toxin had bonded to his hemoglobin 200 times tighter than oxygen, and every heartbeat pumped poison deeper into his failing organs. The attending physician had exhausted every protocol, but each treatment only accelerated the damage because circulation itself was the killer. The surgical team stood paralyzed as the toxin spread. Then the blonde rookie nurse stepped forward and said the only thing that could save him: stop his heart, complete cardiac arrest, now. The attending surgeon laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. Sarah Chen had been on the ward exactly 23 days, fresh from community college, still carrying the plastic smell of new scrubs. But the toxin didn't care about credentials. It had been designed in a weapons lab to turn blood into acid with every heartbeat, and Lieutenant Commander Voss had 4 minutes before organ failure. Sarah reached for the crash cart, because the only way to wash poison from blood is to stop it moving first. Dr. Aris stepped between her and the patient. 16 years of trauma surgery had taught him that death followed certain rules, and stopping a beating heart was surrender, not treatment. The SEAL's name was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Voss, 32 years old, blood type O-egg. His blood pressure was crashing through 70/40, skin mottling with cyanosis that no oxygen mask could reverse because the toxin wasn't in his lungs. It was in his red blood cells, synthetic peptides engineered in a DARPA Black program to disable enemy combatants by turning their own circulatory systems into delivery mechanisms for cellular destruction. Every heartbeat pumped poison deeper into his renal cortex. Sarah didn't look up from the crash cart. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, snapping open the defibrillator panel and adjusting settings that made the charge nurse gasp. 360 joules cardioversion at that level could kill a healthy man. Dr. Aris grabbed her shoulder. "You induce ASTOL on my ward without clearance, and I will have you arrested for murder." His voice carried the weight of hospital policy, of malpractice insurance, of the slow grinding machinery that preferred documented failure over unauthorized success. The monitor showed 2 minutes 40 seconds since peak toxin saturation. But Sarah had seen the classified labs that weren't in his chart. The toxin bound to hemoglobin with an affinity constant of 240 picomoles, irreversible under normal physiological conditions. Standard chelation therapy required blood flow to distribute the antidote, which meant distributing the poison simultaneously to every organ. It was a medical catch-22 written in Voss's declining renal function numbers. The only way to break the bond was to flood the static blood volume with hyperoxygenated saline mixed with a ferrous chelator, a technique that existed in no textbook because it had been developed in a JSOC medical bay for exactly this scenario. She had learned it there, not at community college, not in the nursing program she dropped out of 18 months in. She had been someone else then in a unit that didn't exist, practicing procedures that were officially hallucinations. Voss convulsed again. Foam flecked his lips, pink, with blood from pulmonary capillaries rupturing under oxygen starvation. The surgical resident checked the clock. "We are at 4 minutes post-critical saturation. If we don't circulate an antidote in the next 90 seconds, we lose the kidneys. Permanent dialysis if he lives." Sarah pulled a preloaded syringe from her pocket. Not hospital issue, military-grade potassium chloride in a concentration that would stop a rhino's heart, wrapped in tape marked with a serial number that didn't exist. The blood wash tubing was already in her other hand, adapted from a rapid infuser, modified with a dual lumen that allowed simultaneous drainage and replacement. She needed 30 seconds to establish the field circuit once the heart stopped. Security burst through the doors. Dr. Aris had hit the panic button, 2 uniforms, hands on tasers, shouting for her to step away from the patient. The attending physician screamed about criminal procedure and psychiatric holds. The monitor alarmed, V5. The SEAL's heart was compensating and failing, quivering muscle rather than pumping blood. Sarah looked at the security guards, then she looked at the syringe. The math was simple. 3.5 minutes of total circulatory cessation to chelate the toxin, 4 minutes of warm ischemia before brain death. She had 30 seconds of margin. If she waited for permission, he died. If she acted, she might save him, or she might kill him with a technique that didn't officially exist. She pushed past Dr. Aris. He grabbed her arm. She moved with the efficiency of someone trained to break holds, slipping the lock and stepping to the head of the bed in one motion. The syringe entered the IV port. She pushed the plunger. Potassium chloride hit his bloodstream like a switch. The monitor screamed flatline. Asystole, the room went silent except for the alarm. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the modified tubing and plunged the needles into the femoral artery and vein, opening the shunt that would drain his poisoned blood into the chelation reservoir while flooding his static circulatory system with the wash solution. 3.5 minutes, she hit the timer. Then the doors burst open again, and a man in navy dress blues stepped through with a sidearm drawn, eyes locked on the tubing in her hands. Step away from the patient. That technique is class gamma restricted. You are under arrest for treason. And Sarah realized the program she thought she had escaped had just found her. Sarah didn't flinch. Her hands remained steady on the tubing, watching the dark venous blood flow into the chelation chamber where ferrous compounds strip the synthetic peptides from hemoglobin molecules. 2 minutes 40 seconds remaining. She spoke without turning. Lower the weapon, Commander. Marcus has 2 minutes of viable neural tissue left, and that sidearm won't stop what's already in his bloodstream. The officer didn't move. His eyes tracked the modified rapid infuser, the non-standard tubing, the way she had bypassed the hospital's FDA-approved equipment with military-grade adapters. Only 3 people knew the static wash protocol. Dr. Elias Vance died in Kandahar last year. Major Sarah Chen was listed as killed in action, laboratory explosion, Offutt Air Force Base, 2019. His finger didn't leave the trigger, which means you're either a ghost or the asset we have been hunting for 18 months. The cardiac monitor screamed its flatline tone. Dr. Aris backed against the wall, suddenly understanding that the room had shifted from medical emergency to classified warfare. Sarah checked the reservoir. The blood returning to Voss's body ran clear, oxygenated, free of the charcoal gray tint that marked the toxin. She had designed this procedure 5 years ago in a sub-basement of Walter Reed, back when she still wore rank and believed the program would save lives rather than perfect methods of killing. She remembered the heat of that explosion, the chemical burn of the accelerant she had triggered herself to destroy the research files, the surgical alteration of her fingerprints, the years of living as Sarah the nurse, not Major Chen the architect. She had traded one life for another, believing the program had been shuttered after the Ethical Review Board massacre in 2018. She was wrong. The program hadn't ended. It had gone private. 1 minute 50 seconds. She reached for the defibrillator paddles, prepping the charge. The commander stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the cordite and aftershave. You don't get to vanish, develop a conscience, then resurface when convenient. Chen, the DoD sunk 40 million into your brain, into those hands. You belong to the program. I belong to no one, she said, and placed the paddles on Voss's chest. But she didn't press the button. Not yet. The wash wasn't complete. If she restarted his heart now, the remaining toxin would surge into his coronary arteries like buckshot. The commander's name was Hayes. She remembered him now. Junior officer then, liaison to the medical division, the one who filed the paperwork that declared her remains unrecoverable. He had helped her disappear once, under orders from an admiral who understood that some knowledge was too dangerous to retain but too valuable to destroy. Now Hayes had different orders. Termination or retrieval? No middle ground. That's when the secondary alarm triggered. Not from the cardiac monitor, but from the blood gas analyzer she had jury-rigged to the outflow line. A chemical signature flashed red NTM5, a tracer isotope, microscopic, undetectable by standard hospital labs. She froze. The commander saw her reaction and lowered his weapon slightly. What? They didn't just poison him, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. They tagged him. The toxin carries a radiological tracer. She looked up at Hayes, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. Not for herself, for the exposure. This isn't an assassination attempt. It's a deployment test. They used Marcus to field test a delivery system. The revelation hit like a physical blow. The synthetic toxin bonding to hemoglobin wasn't the end product. It was the delivery mechanism for something else, the isotope. She scrambled to the analyzer, scrolling through the molecular readout. The peptides were carrying microscopic payloads into the bone marrow, designed to activate under specific biometric conditions. Hayes, she said, you need to call off the quarantine. If he dies with that tracer active, it broadcasts a locate signal. Whoever deployed this will know exactly where he died. They'll know the treatment worked. They'll know I'm alive. The NTM5 isotope was a signature she recognized. She had written the theoretical framework for it in her thesis, before the military classified it. A biological GPS designed to track assets in denied environments, but someone had weaponized it, bonded it to the hemoglobin-binding toxin to create a perfect hunter-seeker, inject the target, track them anywhere in the world, and when the heart stopped, the isotope released a burst transmission to satellites. It meant Voss hadn't been injured in a training accident. He had been selected, profiled, infected, and sent to the one hospital in the continental United States, where Sarah Chen was working under an assumed name. Hayes reached for his radio, but the door burst open before he could transmit. Not hospital security, not military police. 3 men in civilian tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas, weapons suppressed and already firing. Sarah hit the deck. The first rounds hit the defibrillator, sparks showering across Voss's bare chest. Hayes returned fire, 3 shots that dropped the first intruder in the doorway. Glass shattered. The crash cart tipped over. Dr. Aris screamed and dove behind the dialysis machine. The second gunman trained his weapon on the patient, on Voss's motionless body, and Sarah realized with perfect clarity that they weren't here to capture anyone. They were here to ensure the test subject died before he could be cured, before the tracer could be extracted, before the data could be analyzed. She rolled left, taking cover behind the oxygen manifold. She saw Dr. Aris huddled in the corner, hyperventilating, useless. Hayes took cover behind the door, exchanging fire with professional calm. These weren't mercenaries. They moved with military precision, with the economy of motion that marked special operations. But their gear was wrong. Civilian cut, commercial plates, no unit patches, private military contractors working for the consortium. The program had been privatized, sold to the highest bidder, and now they were cleaning up loose ends. Sarah grabbed the empty potassium chloride syringe from the floor, now a weapon. She threw it with the precision of a combat medic, striking the gunman's eye. He fired wild, rounds chewing into the ceiling tiles. Hayes shot him center mass. The third man retreated into the hallway, shouting into a throat mic. Subject compromised. Asset confirmed alive. Initiate burn protocol. Sarah scrambled to her feet. The timer hit 45 seconds. The blood wash was complete, but Voss had been flatlined for nearly 4 minutes. Neural damage was imminent. She grabbed the defibrillator, but the power cable had been severed by a stray round. The battery backup showed red. Dead. She looked at Hayes at his sidearm, at the tactical vest he wore. "I need your radio battery now." He understood instantly. He tossed her the radio. She cracked the casing, exposing the lithium cell, and jury-rigged the leads to the defibrillator's charging circuit. 18 seconds, the charge built with a whine. In the hallway, heavy boots approached, not the 3 gunmen, a full tactical team. The burn protocol meant they were coming to sanitize the room, the patient, the nurse, and the commander who had seen too much. The helicopters weren't landing. They were fast roping operators onto the roof. The hospital was being locked down from the outside. No one in, no one out. The consortium couldn't risk the CDC or FBI obtaining samples of the toxin or the cure. They would burn the building, claim a gas explosion, erase every patient, doctor, and piece of evidence, including Sarah, including the proof that she had perfected the antidote. Sarah placed the paddles. 10 seconds. The defibrillator screen flickered. Insufficient charge. The door handle turned. She pressed the button anyway. The shock convulsed Voss's body, arching his back off the gurney. The monitor flatlined, then beeped again. Sinus rhythm. His heart restarted, pumping clean blood, the tracer neutralized by the chelation process. But Voss's eyes snapped open, wide, alert, impossible, after 4 minutes of clinical death. He grabbed Sarah's wrist with a grip that crushed bone. His voice was a rasp, dry, terrified. "They know you saved me," he said. "The signal transmitted. They're coming for the facility, not to kill us, to contain the proof. Sarah, they're already here." And he pointed toward the window, where black helicopters were descending on the hospital roof, not Navy, not marked, bearing the insignia of a pharmaceutical consortium that officially didn't exist. Sarah looked at Hayes, at the dead gunman, at the blood wash equipment that had saved a life but doomed her anonymity. Then she looked at Voss, really looked at him, and saw the recognition in his eyes. He hadn't been a random victim. He had been briefed before deployment. He was bait, and he had known it. "Why did you come here?" she asked him. "Why let them poison you?" Because you were the only one who could save me, he whispered, and I needed to know if you were still alive. The program. It's not just weapons now, it's population control. The next version doesn't need a blood wash, it just needs time. And Sarah, they released it yesterday, in the water supply. 3 cities. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. The poison in Voss's veins was a prototype. The real weapon was already flowing through millions of taps, bonding to hemoglobin in unsuspecting civilians, waiting for the activation signal that would turn ordinary blood into lethal cargo. She had 30 seconds to decide whether to run again or to finally face the consortium that had turned her research into a genocide weapon. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the blood wash tubing and yanked it free from Voss's femoral artery, slapping a pressure dressing in place with one hand while pulling him upright with the other. We need to move now. Hayes, cover the door. Hayes emptied his magazine into the hallway, suppressing the tactical team advancing in stacked formation. Dr. Eris was still frozen against the wall, eyes darting between the dead contractors and the living SEAL who should have been brain dead. Sarah tossed him a scalpel. If you want to live, help us carry him. They moved as a unit, Sarah and Dr. Eris supporting Voss between them, Hayes backing through the doorway, firing controlled pairs. The hospital alarm system finally triggered, a dull monotone that meant fire, not security breach. The consortium had hacked the building systems. They were burning the evidence before extracting. Down the corridor, a nurse stepped out of a supply closet. Sarah recognized her from the cafeteria, morning shifts, always with a coffee stain on her scrubs. The woman raised a silenced pistol. Sarah dropped, dragging Voss down as the rounds stitched the wall above them. The nurse was consortium, embedded for months, waiting. Hayes shot her twice in the chest, and her body slumped, revealing a radio earpiece still transmitting. They ducked into the stairwell, descending 3 flights in 30 seconds. Voss's legs buckled, fresh circulation overwhelming his nervous system. At the second-floor landing, Sarah stopped. The door was marked with a biohazard symbol she knew too well. Level 4 isolation. Her old lab equipment was stored there, seized by the FDA after she disappeared, supposedly destroyed. Hayes checked his weapon. 1 mag left. Sarah, we can't carry him and fight our way out. There are 30 operators on that roof. We aren't going up, she said, punching in a code on the keypad that shouldn't have worked, but did. The red light turned green. We're going through. The level 4 lab was a vault within the hospital. Negative pressure, steel walls designed for Ebola and smallpox research. Inside, rows of cryogenic freezers hummed. Sarah powered up a terminal, her fingers flying across keys. She accessed a back door she had left in the system 5 years ago, a ghost in the code that connected to the CDC's secure pharmaceutical database. Voss slumped into a chair, pale but conscious. The 3 cities, he rasped. It's not 3, it's 30. They started the release yesterday morning. The water supply tests were just the calibration. The real activation is tonight. Sarah's blood ran cold. She pulled up the surveillance data, satellite thermal imaging of major metropolitan areas. Hot spots bloomed across the eastern seaboard, the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest. Not random, a pattern. The toxin was being delivered through municipal water systems, yes, but activated by specific radio frequencies broadcast from cell towers. The consortium didn't need to poison everyone. They just needed to poison enough to create panic, then sell the cure at a price no government could refuse. But here's the thing, Sarah whispered, scrolling through molecular structures. The cure requires the blood wash protocol. Every survivor needs 3 minutes of clinical death and a field-modified chelation unit. There aren't enough machines in the world. Dr. Eris finally spoke, his voice trembling. Then we can't save them. We can only save ourselves. Sarah turned to him, eyes hard. We can save everyone, but I need to reverse the bonding affinity. If I can break the toxin's hold on hemoglobin without stopping the heart, we can mass-produce an antidote. She pulled a vial of her own blood from the freezer, labeled with a false name. I spent 5 years studying the toxin variants in my own body. I'm immune, or rather, I adapted. Hayes stared at her. You infected yourself? I had to know if I could beat it, she said, drawing her own blood into a syringe. The synthetic peptides bond to hemoglobin's beta chains, but my blood produces a tertiary protein structure that blocks the binding site. She injected the sample into an analyzer. If I can synthesize this protein, we can cure 30 cities, but I need 6 hours. You have 6 minutes, Hayes said, pointing at the security monitor. The tactical team had breached the stairwell. They were sweeping floor by floor. Voss stood up, shaky but determined. "No, we have longer." He pulled a device from his boot, a signal jammer. "I took this from the lead contractor. It blocks their radio coordination. They'll have to search manually. Gives us maybe 40 minutes. Sarah worked with feverish precision, spinning up the centrifuge, initiating protein sequencing. The machine hummed and screeched. Dr. Aris watched the monitors, tracking the tactical team's progress. "They're on the 4th floor, 3rd, 2nd," the analyzer beeped. "Sequence complete." Sarah stared at the results and her face went white. No, that's impossible." "What?" Hayes demanded. "The protein structure," she said, voice barely audible. "It's not natural. It's been engineered into me." She looked up at them, horror dawning. "They didn't just let me escape 5 years ago. They released me. I've been a walking laboratory, breeding the cure in my blood so they could harvest it when ready. The explosion, the new identity, the nursing job, it was all staged. The consortium has been watching me, waiting for me to develop the final antibody." The door to the lab dented inward, a battering ram striking steel. Sarah grabbed the syringe of her blood and the data chip from the analyzer. Then she realized the worst truth. "If I've been the test subject all along, then this hospital isn't a random location. It's the extraction site. They brought Voss here to force me to reveal the cure, to prove it worked. And now that I have, they don't need me alive anymore." The lights cut out. Emergency red illumination bathed the room. A voice came over the intercom, smooth, familiar male. "Sarah, you finally did it. You finished the work we started together. Now be a good girl and open the door. We have patients to cure." And the voice belonged to Dr. Elias Vance, the man who taught her everything, the man who died in Kandahar. Sarah looked at the sealed vault door, at the chip in her hand containing the salvation of millions, and at the men who had fought to keep her alive. She understood now. This wasn't about containment. It was about harvesting. And the final act would begin with her deciding whether to destroy the cure or hand it to the devil who created the disease. Sarah pressed her palm against the intercom, her finger hovering over the transmit button. The steel door groaned, the hydraulic ram outside denting the frame with rhythmic precision. 30 seconds, Vance repeated, his voice oozing the same clinical patience he'd used when teaching her arterial sutures years ago in a lab that officially didn't exist. "Open the door, give me the protein sequence. 30 million people live. Keep playing the martyr and they die screaming while you suffocate in a sealed box." She slid the data chip into her pocket, then turned to the cryogenic vaults lining the south wall. Her fingers flew across the biometric scanner, bypassing the hospital's security protocols with backdoor codes she'd implanted 5 years ago during her first week as a janitor, before she became a nurse. The vaults hissed open, revealing not Ebola samples or smallpox cultures, but rows of military-grade auto-injectors preloaded with amber fluid. Her insurance policy. 5 years of stealing nanolighters, of experimental serums, of filtering her own blood in apartment sinks, of building a microscopic pharmacy in plain sight. "I don't need your door, Elias," she said into the intercom. "I built my own exit." The door buckled. A tactical operator rolled a flashbang through the gap. Sarah grabbed Hayes by the collar and dragged him behind the analyzer console as the device detonated, a percussive wave of sound and light that shattered glass vials across the lab. Vance entered through the smoke, immaculate in a charcoal suit, silver-haired, very much alive, flanked by operators whose rifles tracked Sarah with mechanical precision. "The injectors, Sarah," he said, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. "Hand them over, and I'll tell you why you really survived the Kandahar explosion. I'll tell you who pulled you from the fire." "You did," Sarah said, rising from behind the console. "Because you needed me to, because I was the experiment." Vance smiled, but his eyes were dead. "Precisely. Subject Zero isn't a title, Sarah. It's a pedigree." He raised his pistol, a sleek .45 with a suppressor. "Now the injectors." Sarah grabbed 3 devices. She tossed one to Hayes, one to Voss, and kept the third. "The synthetic antibody," she explained, her thumb hovering over the activation cap. "Replicated from my own blood marrow 6 months ago. I didn't know if it would work without the cardiac arrest, without the blood wash. But we're about to find out." She plunged the needle into her carotid artery and depressed the plunger. The cold hit her bloodstream like liquid nitrogen. She gasped, falling to her knees, her vision tunneling. Vance fired. The round struck the steel cabinet behind her. Sparking, Hayes returned fire, driving Vance behind cover. Sarah convulsed, her heart hammered against her ribs, trying to reject the synthetic intrusion. Then, warmth. Spreading from her core outward, she opened her eyes to see Voss injecting himself, his color returning instantly, the gray pallor of toxin poisoning, flushing pink as the antibodies bonded to his hemoglobin and stripped away the synthetic peptides without stopping his heart. It works, Voss breathed, without death, without the wash. Vance stared, his tactical advantage evaporating. Impossible. You didn't have the base pairs, the sequencing. I built a gene sequencer in my bathtub, Sarah gasped, wiping blood from her nose. From a blender and a laser pointer, you taught me never to rely on the lab. She stumbled to the ventilation controls. With trembling hands, she pried open the main intake valve and cracked open a vial of her own blood, dripping it into the filter. The HVAC system roared, drawing air through the contaminated filter and pumping it throughout the hospital's ductwork. Within minutes, the airborne antibodies would reach the ER, the maternity ward, the cafeterias. Within hours, carried by departing patients and staff, it would reach the subway, the airports, the 30 cities beyond. You wanted a cure? She asked, leaning against the console as Vance's operators closed in. You just inhaled it. My blood is in the air conditioning, Elias. Everyone in this building is now manufacturing the antibody in their own bone marrow. You can't control it. You can't patent it. It's open source. Vance's face twisted in fury. He stepped forward, aiming directly at her head. Then I'll take the source. The door to the lab exploded inward for the second time. But this time, the men entering wore FBI tactical gear, not private military. They moved with the sloppy urgency of federal agents, not the precision of contractors. Leading them was a woman in a blue windbreaker with 3 letters on the back, CDC. Freeze, federal agents. Vance spun, firing at the newcomers. 3 agents dropped. Hayes lunged, tackling Vance as his gun skittered across the floor. They grappled, Vance's superior knowledge of anatomy against Hayes's combat training. Sarah crawled toward the gun, her fingers brushing the grip as Vance broke Hayes's chokehold and scrambled for the weapon. Sarah grabbed it first. She didn't aim at Vance. She aimed at the cryogenic tanks behind him and fired. The tanks ruptured, flash freezing the air, releasing clouds of nitrogen gas that engulfed Vance and his remaining operators. They fell, gasping, their lungs seizing from the cryogenic blast. As Vance collapsed, clutching his throat, Sarah stood over him. She kicked his gun away and knelt, pressing her hand against his frozen cheek. You wanted to know if I could save 30 million people? She whispered. The answer is yes, but you forgot the second question. Can I save them without becoming you? She looked at the CDC agents recovering from the firefight, at the cameras they wore on their chests, recording everything. I surrender, she announced, raising her hands. I'm Sarah Chen, formerly Major Sarah Chen, United States Army Medical Research Command. I have in my bloodstream the cure for a synthetic toxin released into the water supplies of 30 American cities. I'm also the original test subject for that toxin, genetically engineered by this man to serve as a biological patent. She pulled the data chip from her pocket and held it up to the nearest camera. This contains the formula. No blood wash required, no cardiac arrest, just a simple injection. I'm releasing it into the public domain. No military control, no corporate ownership. If you want to study me, fine. But the cure belongs to everyone. As agents cautiously approached, weapons lowered, Vance laughed from the floor, a wet, choking sound. You think you've won, Subject Zero, don't you understand? Your genetic code, it's proprietary. It belongs to the consortium. By releasing your DNA into the wild, you've committed theft of intellectual property. Those 30 million people you saved, they now carry your patented genes. They owe us royalties for the air they breathe, and when they have children, those children will be our property, legally, biologically, forever. Sarah looked at the chip in her hand, then at the cameras, understanding the trap within the trap. She had saved their lives but indebted their bloodlines. Unless I change the terms, she said. She snapped the chip in half and swallowed the pieces. Vance's eyes went wide. No, if the cure is inside me, she said, wiping her mouth, then you have to keep me alive to study it. And if I'm in federal custody under FBI protection with 30 million witnesses watching, you can't disappear me. You can't dissect the source. I'm the facility now, Elias, but I'm a facility with lawyers. As the agents secured Vance and his operators, as Hayes stood up clutching his bruised throat, as Voss checked his own pulse with wonder, Sarah allowed herself to be handcuffed, not as a prisoner but as a protected witness. The cameras followed her out, live streaming to news outlets that had been tipped off by Hayes's earlier call. In the elevator descending toward the lobby and the waiting news vans, Voss stood beside her, the SEAL who had been sent as bait, who had allowed himself to be poisoned to draw her out, now served as her escort. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not a soldier, but a man. "You could have run," he said. "When you realized the HVAC system would work, you could have disappeared again." Sarah looked at her reflection in the elevator doors, at the woman who had been a ghost, then a nurse, then a weapon, and now was simply a witness. "I was tired of being invisible," she said. "Some cures only work in the light." The doors opened, flashbulbs erupted, and Sarah Chen stepped forward into a future she didn't control, but had chosen. The flashbulbs didn't stop for 3 days. Sarah Chen's face appeared on every screen, every feed, every front page, not as a soldier, not as a scientist, but as a cautionary tale and a beacon simultaneously. The trial that followed established legal precedent that would ripple through courts for decades. Human genetic code cannot be patented, cannot be owned, cannot be treated as corporate property even if engineered in a lab. But the victory was incomplete. Vance's consortium dissolved only to reform under new shells, new names, new toxins waiting in the wings. Sarah lives now in a modest house with bulletproof windows and a garden she tends herself. The antibody remains in her blood, replicating, evolving, a living cure that requires no factory, no prescription, no permission. 30 million people carry fragments of her genetic signature, a biological open-source license written in nucleotides. But some nights she wakes wondering if Vance was right in his final whispered threat from the prison transport, that by saving them she didn't free them, but simply changed their owner from a corporation to a legacy they never chose. The question haunts the medical ethics committees and the congressional hearings. When a cure becomes part of a person's fundamental biology, who controls the future? Sarah answered it the only way she knew how. She stopped a heart to save a life. She swallowed a secret to give it away. And in that choice between proprietary silence and public salvation, she proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't the toxin that kills, but the conscience that refuses to let death have the final word. If this story moved you, if you believe that the quiet ones sometimes hold the keys to our survival, please subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the Sarahs still working in shadows, waiting for the moment to step into the light.